Grand Rapids City Planning Commission hearings on Thursday, November 14, 2024. Our normal course of action here is city planner will present to the commission the case and take any questions from the commission, and then we'll invite the applicant up to add any additional information to what the staff person explained. Then we'll have a public hearing where members of the public will be welcome to come up to the microphone, introduce themselves, and have up to 3 minutes to share their thoughts with the commission on the case. Then we'll invite the applicant back up to address anything that came up in the public hearing to the commission, and then the commission will deliberate and make a decision. Staff does prepare for the commission draft resolution language, both in favor of and against each resolution. And so if it appears that we are reading things, we probably are, but it's not because there's a foregone conclusion. With that, commissioners, does anybody have a potential conflict of interest?
I don't think so, but I should probably bring it up. So the second application at 655 Ann Street, Pure Architects has worked on it in the past. I don't think we're currently working on it, considering the fact that there's drawings from another architecture firm in the packet. But I was never part of that project, so I can't say for certain that our office has nothing to do with it at this point. I'm not aware of anybody working on it, but we have enough people that it's possible.
And do you yourself have any information about the case that wouldn't already be available to the rest of the commission?
No, it didn't even occur to me until a minute ago that I should probably say I might have a conflict.
I'll make a motion that Commissioner Swim does not have a conflict.
Second.
Any reservation from council? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. No conflict. Thank you. Any others? Okay, we'll turn to our first case. Elizabeth.
This first case is a request for special land use and site plan review at 1947 and 1961 Alpine Avenue Northwest. This may look familiar to you as the Planning Commission, considered a rezoning of this property from SDIT, that is shown on the map here, to TNTCC. That was back on August 22nd. So subsequent to that, the City Commission did approve the rezoning request on October 25th of this year, and although it shows SDIT on this map, it is actually zoned Transitional City Center. So it's adjacent to Transitional City Center across the street. We've got SDIT to the south, and then we've got Walker to the north. We, to the north, immediately to the north is the Walker, City of Walker municipal boundary. So Lucky's Auto Parts and Salvage is in the City of Walker. The subject property, which consists of 2 parcels, is in the City of Grand Rapids, and to the south is the City of Grand Rapids. South of the railroad tracks is SDIT Industrial Transportation, and then across the street, across Alpine in the City of Grand Rapids is also Transitional City Center. So the applicant is coming to you today to ask for approval to establish a new recreational marijuana retailer, as well as to exceed the required number of parking spaces by more than 20%. The applicant is currently operating at 1815 Alpine. Is that right, or is it 18? Okay, 1815 Alpine. It's Jars Cannabis. and it has been operating there for several years with special land use approval. There was a subsequent approval for a surface parking lot to the north. And the applicant is finding they need a larger facility and additional parking. And that is what they're coming to you today for. Now, we're not doing so many new marijuana retailers these days, but back in about 2019, when we adopted the ordinance, the Planning Commission was looking at a lot of these, and we talked a lot about separation distances. So as we've outlined in the staff report, there are minimum separation distances between different kinds of marijuana or cannabis facilities in different zone districts. And they need to be separated from each other and from other sensitive uses. Now, the applicant's existing location, I do not have it shown on this map. It is down here at the bottom of at the bottom of the screen. It's in the TNTBA zone district, and it is less than the required 1,000 1,000 linear foot distance from the new location. So the applicant does want to move to this new location and has agreed to voluntarily revoke their special land use at their existing location at 1815 Alpine, should this new location be approved for a retailer. That is included as a condition of approval if you are amenable to this use. Onto the specifics of the site, there is the site is currently used for vehicle sales and vehicle repair. The applicant plans to rehabilitate the existing building and parking lot and expand the existing parking lot. I'll show you these slides first before I go to the site plan. This is what the site looks like currently. You can see that there's a grade change between the parking lot to the north and the lot where the building is. There is a non-conforming pole sign on the site. There is a significant number of public infrastructure elements. Right at the lot line, you can see the pedestrian crossing signal there. We've got the sidewalk, which is in the right-of-way, which you can see is very, very narrow. The lot line is about right where this pole is located. We can't really see on any of those other photos, but there's a, oops, this is our 1815. Let's see. There is a fire hydrant, and there's a fire hydrant up here, there's a guy wire, and there is traffic signals. You can see that Ann Street comes into, Alpine at an angle. There's a traffic signal there, and then one on Alpine. And just for reference, this is the current facility, 1815 Alpine. You can see their store, and then to the north here, this is a surface parking lot. It's actually on a separate lot. Back to our subject site, this is a survey. You can see that there's public infrastructure right at the lot line there. So this is the site plan of what is proposed. The applicant is planning on using the existing building. They're planning on a right-in, right-out configuration for access to the site on the southerly lot, 1947, and then, in and out near the northerly lot line. This is a new location, this new curb cut, and this would require relocation of some of those utilities, that infrastructure that I talked about, and it would also require some updates to the traffic signal. The applicant is aware of that. That was part of their traffic study, and should the Planning Commission be amenable to this use, relocation and upgrades to those to that infrastructure would be a condition of approval, and that would be at the applicant's cost. Since I was just talking about the traffic signal, I'll just talk a little bit about the traffic study. Mobile GR has reviewed their traffic study and concurs with the results or the conclusions of that study, that the moving of JARS to this location would have a negligible impact on traffic operations on Alpine. The traffic study does recommend those upgrades, such as signalizing the existing traffic signal to allow for ingress and egress, signalized ingress and egress at this north point, and also recommended this right in, right out. On to the floor plan. You can see that there's a lobby, there's the retail area, and then, offices and, other back of house operations. So there are certain requirements in our zoning ordinance, as well as from the state relative to cannabis uses. For instance, you are not permitted to be able to see the product from outside the building. In this case, there are no windows around the retail, so you wouldn't be able to see in. And there are some interior windows, but they are going to be frosted, so the product would not be visible from the lobby or from the exterior. I should mention that because this is a car garage, the floor plan and the exterior does include new windows. It's a whole new exterior to modify the building to be suitable for this use. The applicant has, in their plans, shown adequate transparency on the front of the building, which is the east elevation facing Alpine. So they will meet 60% there. The north elevation, they will meet the 30% side 30% transparency required for the side elevation. And then we have the west elevation, which is the rear. Windows are not required. And then the south elevation, no windows are proposed. 30% is required. I would leave it up to the Planning Commission as to whether you find transparency to be necessary on this side of the building. It does, I do want to point out that it's fairly close to, it's actually an embankment, and where's that photo I'm looking for? There's the railroad right-of-way and embankment there. So they aren't proposing to add any windows, and so the Planning Commission does have the ability to waive that requirement if you find it warranted. Sorry, I keep moving all the slides here. There we go. So I do want to talk a little bit about the parking. So for this size of a cannabis retailer, 7 parking spaces is required. The applicant is proposing 90 parking spaces on the site. 7 parking spaces at the rear of the building are going to be reserved for curbside pickup or delivery. So someone from the building will bring out the product to someone who has placed an order in advance. So curbside delivery would be located in the back. The remainder of the site would be, there'd be handicap parking, and then employee and customer parking. So pursuant to zoning ordinance regulations, no more than 120% of the required parking can be provided. In this case, that would be 9 parking spaces, and they're asking for 10 times the amount. So if they do want to pursue that additional amount, we do need to have a parking study completed. And they did submit a parking demand study, and the study concludes that a total of 80 parking spaces are projected to be needed. Now, it looks like the study was conducted at the Mount Pleasant site, and staff did question that. We asked the engineer why they chose that, and they said that they really needed to have a site that was of the same size, something more comparable to what is being proposed here. That's why they couldn't use the existing JAR site on Alpine. So the Planning Commission is being asked whether you find that the study demonstrates that the additional parking is warranted. Lastly, well, no, there's a couple more things. I do want to mention that the site will need to be brought up to current standards for green infrastructure such as parking lot screening, tree canopy, and green space, and that can all be done at LUD's permitting. The applicant has submitted a lighting plan as well as a CPTED, or Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design plan, both of which have been reviewed by our CPTED specialist in the police department. They've reviewed those things along with the site plan and the security plan, and have found that the plan is adequate and meets our requirements in the zoning ordinance. I want to mention signage. The signage that is shown on the plan is unfortunately exceeds the requirements for the TCC zone district, but we're not actually approving signage today. If approved, signage will be subject to the requirements for TCC, and they'd pull sign permits. So, in conclusion, we're looking at a new recreational marijuana facility, as well as the extent or the need for parking in excess of 120% of what is required. In the staff report, there are a number of elements listed that the Planning Commission should consider when considering a new cannabis facility. That's such as the type of activities, hours of operation, whether excessive police resources may be used. And so I'd ask that you consider those things as you are debating this application. Do you have any questions for me or my colleague Al before we turn it over to the applicant?
To the parking calculation, I did read the report. Can you tell me what the calculation is to come up with only 7 parking places? That seems low. And
Well-
considering they're moving because they don't have enough space for parking.
Sure. So this is a traditional neighborhood, right? Traditional neighborhoods are generally, there are older neighborhoods. They're closer to downtown. They were built at a time before we relied upon the automobile. So they are intended to be very pedestrian oriented. Now, that doesn't mean that every single site within those zone districts meet all the criteria. And I can think of some that we recently looked at a couple meetings ago. It was a TN, but it didn't really read TN. It wasn't very pedestrian oriented. So I think that's one of the things you need to consider. So the TN districts have a relatively low parking requirement because of that.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Elizabeth at this time? Okay, thank you. We'll invite the applicant up.
Hi, Lisa Dottie from Jars Cannabis. This project has been probably 2 years in the making. Once we realized that that property was no longer buffered out from another facility. In terms of the parking calculations, when they performed that study, they did take into account our existing traffic at our site and our customers on a day, I think they looked at a week or something. So they did take all that to account and applied that to the report and their recommendation for the additional parking. Right now, on our current site, we have 22 spots. We have 2 shifts per day, so during the weekdays, we have 10 to 12 employees per shift. On weekends, it's 15 to 20 employees. So we're currently leasing out spaces from neighboring businesses. We have customers parking at businesses, crossing the road. It's just, we realize we are a nuisance to our neighbors. Our neighbors have told us we are a nuisance to them. So when we realized these 2 parcels were available, we heavily pursued it. It's very advantageous to us, to our customers, to our neighbors, and I think to the city as well, because it really redevelops those properties. And then if you also, I know we kind of talked about this when we looked at rezoning, the Walker master plan for all those properties, they are really trying to convert Alpine into a more business, commercial-friendly area and corridor. So overall, that just kind of aligns with everything. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it.
When you are trying to figure out how many parking spaces you need, is it based on the square feet of the retail space? Is it based on like the area, the geography that you're serving? What really is it based on?
It's based on the need for our employees, so that way they have access and they have safe parking close to our site instead of walking like they currently are now. It's based on the need of how many customers we service per hour. I mean, that's really what we're looking at.
Okay. Any questions for the applicant?
And the number of customers you service per hour is?
That's a great question that I do not have in front of me. I mean, it really varies, but if you've ever gone by our location, it's quick service, in and out. I think it's like 12 to 15 minutes on average per customer that they're in there. Yeah, our current Grand Rapids location is one of the top in our portfolio of stores. And right now we have 25 locations that are open with 2 more pending CRA approval. So This is like in the top 3 locations, so.
Thank you.
Could you walk us through how the parking lot's getting used? We were told that there's 7 spaces behind the building are for curbside pickup, so I think we already understand people aren't getting out of their cars and they're being dealt with at the window of their vehicle, but where are customers parking, and presumably everybody else is walking into the waiting room?
Yep, so customers will, when they enter, depending on where they're coming from in Alpine, they'll park, I assume primarily on that northern lot. And the curbside customers will, we plan to have some directional signage to kind of point them how to navigate through the lot to get to those curbside spots. So when customers come in or when they park, when Elizabeth showed that picture, there is a stairway between those 2 parcels because of the grade change. So we do plan to, I think it's wood right now, we are going to put concrete stairs in there. So they'll walk down and then they'll enter our lobby. Right now, our store right now is about 1,200 square feet total. So we have customers that will wait outside because there's not enough space. Our employees do not have break room space. So the lobby that will be, once this site is renovated, it's going to be a quite larger lobby for customers to properly stay inside, have a warm space to stay in, have a place to sit.
Thank you.
In looking at the parking demand study that was submitted, it states that there's approximately 300 customers shopping at any given day with a peak demand of about 25 customers at any given time. I can't do the math, but if there's like a 12-minute average cycle, that's how many you'd get per hour.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So these are, I'm sorry. So these are people who are like actively shopping. These are not people who are on the floor. There's a waiting period. This is a waiting room that people are in.
Mm-hmm.
The number of people who are allowed on the floor, is there a limit?
Yep, so the number of people allowed inside the retail space is limited to how many staff members we have to service them.
On average, how many staff members do you have to service them?
During the week, it's 10 to 12. On the weekends, it's 15 to 20.
So what number is that?
So there, on a weekend, we might have 20 staff members
Okay.
in that retail space to service 20 customers.
20 customers, so one-on-one, essentially. So you can get 20 people in there, let's say at 2 o'clock, those 20 people are out 2:15. And then another 20 people, and then another 20. The rest of those folks are in the waiting room, in the lobby. So the parking then is just taken up by people who are waiting
Yeah,
and not people who are actively shopping.
yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions for the applicant at this time?
I just wanted to revisit the site. So it looks like you've got 2 new access drives. Looks like there's some, what I would consider significant movement of city utilities and such. Would there be an opportunity to work with the city to align that sidewalk to pull it back from the back of curb? Because I think the city of Walker, just to the north, has done that. And that seems like that would be a significant improvement from a pedestrian circulation perspective. Is that something that you'd be open to?
Yeah, we're definitely open to that, and I know that's kind of been discussed, and,
Okay.
but yeah, creating a more pedestrian-friendly zone is the goal.
Yep. That'd be great. Thank you.
Kristen, do you know how that works with, so outside of the city of Grand Rapids, their sidewalk turns and comes back out to the curb in order to line up with the sidewalk in front of this property. So does that, is there an avenue to get that repaired if we're trying to line up with the remainder of the sidewalk to the north? Or how does that work?
Yeah, we'd have to work with the City of Walker engineers and potentially the property owner to the north. I don't know enough about where those lot lines fall, but that would be something that I would ask our engineering department to take on to align it as best we can. If we can't get full alignment and we have that jog out to the back of curb and then back in, I would still think that's a win. Maybe imperfect, but we would definitely try, and that would be part of my ask of the engineering department.
While on that topic, the current sidewalk is right at the right-of-way. Would there be a deeding of new right-of-way, or is there an easement? How is that handled?
I think it could be one of two ways. Legally, it could be a dedication of additional public right-of-way, or probably the easier path, and perhaps the path the applicant might, is looking at an easement. So we would look at a public utility, public access easement for maybe it's 15 feet from back of curb over the right-of-way, we wouldn't have an easement, but from wherever that right-of-way is in. We've done it in other cases, Michigan Street in front of Seven Monks, for example. That sidewalk is wholly on private property, but it doesn't look and feel like that, and we do have a public access easement over their property to provide public access across their property. And so it would be a coordination of, with the property owner to establish easements for the utilities as well as the sidewalk.
Anything else for the applicant or for Director Turkelson? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll open up the public hearing for anyone who would like to comment on this case. Make your way up to the microphone. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and turn to discussion.
It does seem that that the parking need is much higher than the calculation permitted by the zoning traditional neighborhood. So I could see some leeway on that. The idea that they have both people inside and people waiting, that's about 40 people. And if you add on top of that 20 people that are working on a weekend, you're up to 60. So plus the 7 that are drive up. And I know, having driven past this, that people seem in the existing facility circling around looking for parking, and as the applicant said, having to find farther away, maybe cross busy Alpine, things like that. So this seems like a good location for them. It's a vacant property. That's kind of my take from it right now.
You know, when I look at the parking, there's 4 different groups that's parking. There's those who are employees, those who are waiting, those who are shopping, and then those who are in the curbside pickup. Yeah, and so right now there appears to be ample space for parking for the business. In their current location, there isn't. If not for them to use that for parking, then it appears that it would just sit as a vacant property. I don't have any reservations about the increased need for parking there on the space.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and overall, I like it. I don't see any reservations, but I do want to just point out and just put on the record that essentially we're getting rid of green to make green by selling green. So we're talking about sustainability and environment. That's essentially what we're doing.
So I generally struggle with designing parking lots for worst-case scenarios. I mean, it's how we end up with vastly empty parking lots 90+% of the time. Quite honestly, I struggle with the number of 90 parking spaces. I think with 30 seats in the waiting room, the potential for 40 people being served in the building, the idea that you're going to have another 20 cars just hanging out, waiting and not knowing when you're going to be allowed to enter the building doesn't really make any sense to me. But with all of that being said, I do think that they've proven a case that they need a lot more than 9 spaces, right? So when you get into, if it's 50 or 70 spaces, I don't know that there's going to be a dramatic impact, it's going to be dramatically different if you're providing those spaces, like from a pedestrian standpoint. So then we're really just talking about green space and stormwater. So I think I also struggle with the fact that if I were going to say it needs to be less than 90, I'm going to be just spitting out an arbitrary number because I don't know. But I guess, so I don't have, I'm not sure how to think about it or how I should be thinking about it, but I'm struggling with the quantity of spaces and how that's actually supposed to work. I mean, this is almost, it's 4 times what they have now, or almost, yeah, it's 4 times what they have now. So, and then outside of parking, I think it would be great if, because the surface parking and the lack of walkability in the area, at least getting the sidewalk off from the street and back from the curb would be very beneficial.
I think part of my evaluation of this is that it's not really located in a residential area. You're not going to have people necessarily walking, maybe taking the bus, but it's in a quasi, I mean, it's much of it's industrial, it's moving in different directions, but when I drive down this section of Alpine, it's a mishmash of different kinds of uses between retail and industrial. So I don't feel like what we're doing by building the parking, I hope is helping a business be successful, and is not gonna, you know, I do see some residential up there and maybe people will be walking, but because of the barrier of the railroad, it's not one of those sites where I think in the near future you're going to see a lot of walkability in this area. And much of the area is industrial and parking lots. And right now, vacant parking lots to the north where that industrial area is reutilizing. So this is more of a retail, and if we're going more retail, this supports it. So I don't have the kind of reservations I would have if this was a more neighborhood kind of retail strip here.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I was in New Buffalo over the weekend and drove past a brand new Jars, and my initial thought was that is a huge parking lot. But as I got closer, that parking lot was jammed. And it's people meeting there, and there were a couple trucks, there were a couple delivery people, there was so much activity around this brand new facility that I do understand that on a Saturday or a Sunday, I was driving past it on a Friday and it was packed. I could understand the need to accommodate, and putting a number on it is kind of arbitrary, and so I'm comfortable with the 90 spaces. I did want to touch on the transparency of that one side of the building that runs along the embankment. I don't see an issue with that. The only people looking in that direction are the train engineers, I think, along that space there. So I'm comfortable with that. So overall, I generally support the project.
Yeah, I guess if on the parking, I think I'm comfortable the way it is. I almost wish we had different tools in our toolbox, because I think, if given the layout of the building and what the applicant talked about with related customers, I could see you could have 50 customers in the building at a time, right? 20 being served, 30 in the waiting room approximately, given the seating layout that they had, which I know is, representation. And you have 20 employees, now you have 70 people on site, and then you have a few coming and going. It doesn't seem like we're too far off. However, it would be nice if we had a tool which we could say those back 13 spaces closest to the detention area, can we gravel those first and see if they're really necessary? But I don't really know that we have, I wouldn't require that, I guess, but something like that to say have sort of surge parking capacity where you still have pervious surface, right, that doesn't create so much runoff. Gravel's needs a little more regular maintenance, but is easier to maintain than asphalt generally. So something like that in the toolbox would be kind of nice, because I think if I was developing the site, I might leave those 13 spaces off and put them on after 6 months if I really needed them, right? But I'm comfortable overall with the parking situation. One question I had about the sidewalk: if the applicant chooses to deed the right-of-way or would prefer that because the right-of-way of Alpine is jogged over in Walker, right? So it almost might make more sense as the applicant to deed the right-of-way and put the sidewalk there. I wouldn't want them to have to come back here because of setback issues. So I don't know if that's something that we can manage here, so that they don't have to come back if they choose to deed it instead of provide an easement.
Yeah, there wouldn't be setback issues, because if anything, the building currently is non-conforming, and we'd actually want to see the building come closer to the lot line, but they currently have their non-conforming rights to leave it where it is.
Okay.
So if we were to engage in a conversation about expanding the right-of-way, it would not create a setback issue.
So that 25-foot setback noted on the site plan, which I'm assuming is for parking, that wouldn't, if that changes and it's now 8 feet instead, that we don't have to, I just want to make sure we don't create another issue if that's the choice they choose to make.
If anything, it brings the building closer to compliance.
I understand the building, but what about the parking?
The parking shouldn't be in front of the building, period, in the zone district.
Okay. So there's no parking distance from road right-of-way requirement?
Correct.
Okay.
I'm not sure where the 25-foot setback came from. I could only wager a guess that under the prior zone district of industrial, there is a 25-foot setback, so maybe there was a little bit of confusion with the civil engineers and added that there.
So then how do we discuss the sidewalk, or do we condition approval on the sidewalk relocation, or do we just encourage the conversation, or what would?
Well, Elizabeth, did you add that as a condition?
Just that they discuss, the
Yeah.
final site plan approval is subject to approval by mobile GR and engineer.
Yeah.
So I kind of would assume that would be in that whole conversation.
Is that enough?
Sorry, I'm looking at John Bartlett. It sounds like they're going to have to pull the sidewalk back within the driveways. Yeah, John, could you come up? Per testimony, the applicant has already agreed to do that.
Yeah, and I'm
So
comfortable
the
with that.
implementation could be through a condition and permitting, but John might have more to add.
Yeah, so everybody, I'm John Bartlett. I'm the city transportation engineer. I work in the mobile GR department. The way that we design and install driveways in the city is what's known as a dub down, basically the slope from the gutter line up to the level of the driveway. And our requirements are that the sidewalk is at that upper level to establish that pedestrians are the throughput through the driveway, and vehicles have to interact with them appropriately. So that's going to be but that ramp is going to push the sidewalk back away from the curb already, and they've got 2 driveways proposed here, so it's going to happen twice along their frontage already. So it's in everybody's best interest to pull the sidewalk back along the entire frontage. Otherwise, it's going to meander back and forth at each one of those driveways. And with the condition that Walker has to the north, it would happen 3 times in this very short distance.
And that would be unacceptable from a accessibility standpoint to have
Correct.
it go back and forth. So I think with the testimony and the requirement that Mr. Bartlett just stated, I think a condition of approval would be helpful, but I think it sounds like it was going to happen anyway, or in some form.
Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just wanting to speak to the tools in the toolbox. I don't think we have a tool that specifically would allow for maybe temporary parking situation like you've alluded to. We do have the deferred parking, which is typically at the request of the applicant to not build as much as required and then demonstrate that it's needed and allows for an expansion kind of at pre-authorization by the Planning Commission. I think, one, it's important that we take the application as it's been submitted and make a decision based on that. But you do have the deferred parking that could be explored if you would like us to dig into it a little bit more about building X number of spaces today with the possibility. I just think it's also a very expensive way to build parking by deferring it.
Yeah, and I'm comfortable with in this scenario. It almost feels like that deferred parking arrangement is starting to flip in that people are coming asking for more than we want. So it almost has to figure out how to go the other direction, but I'm comfortable with this as it is.
I'm comfortable with the additional parking here with a few caveats, I suppose. One thing I want to get some clarity on is which site plan we're looking at, because there are 3 plans that show the parking lot and all 3 are different. I have a preference, but I don't know if that's what's actually being requested. So there's a layout on page 72 of our packet, on page 84 of our packet, and on page 185 of our packet. It looks like page 72 and page 185 are both dated 9/17 of this year. The layout on page 84 is too blurry on my packet for me to make out a date, but it's my preferred layout because it includes an additional landscape island. It includes a pass-through on what is the east end, like the northeast end of the lot, where you're passing from that lower lot to the upper lot and getting to the egress where you can go either north or south on Alpine, which makes the most sense to me. On the other 2 layouts, one of them doesn't have that drive at all, so you have to go all the way to the west end to make it around. On the other layout, it has the drive, but it has parking spaces on that eastern portion of the parking lot, which means that you still have to go all the way to the west end of the lot and back around. Doesn't make much sense to me. So which one are we approving? That's a question I have, and do you want to handle that now?
What's the third, the higher numbered sheet?
185 is a lighting plan, but it shows a parking lot layout that's different than a plan dated on the same date, but labeled as a site plan. The applicant was...
The city has one.
Okay.
Yeah, so it looks like some plans were included for other evaluation purposes, meaning the lighting and/or the traffic study. So those efforts were done with a site plan that I presume was an older version. This is the plan that was submitted as the site plan that the applicant wishes to move forward with. Sorry, the one on your screen. I apologize. Sheet C101. so the one on the screen is not the one that Commissioner Van Streen said was his preference, namely because, and I think the applicant might agree, you would come in off Alpine at that northernmost access drive, and if you wanted or needed an accessible space, for example, you might need to circulate all the way through the parking lot before you could drop down to the southern or the lower level. And you have to travel significant distance westerly before you can come back to get to those spaces in front. The preferred plan that the commissioner is looking at has a drive aisle in those, what would that, easterly 6 spaces in the north lot. The preferred plan that he was referencing shows an island and a drive, an access drive. So if I could, oops,
And that's on page 84.
I'll also highlight it here.
Tyler Cravens, the civil engineer for the project. I think during the last review, we were actually asked to remove the island with that drive aisle. So I think that's why we have it the way that it's currently shown.
Sorry,
There was I think there was some concern about how traffic coming in may interact with other traffic trying to exit, and there wouldn't be ample room for them to be able to navigate and turn there. So I think that's ultimately why we're asked to take that off. But
Asked by the city,
yes,
yeah, not asked by your client?
correct.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Not a problem.
Okay, so this is the revised plan based on input from the Traffic Safety Department that eliminates that easier access and drive aisle. And if you would like Mr. Bartlett to speak to that?
So I think there's some miscommunication in our hand gestures. I don't know who made that recommendation, and we can touch base upon that, but my professional opinion is that should absolutely be a drive aisle. You're not going to get people, the only way you're going to get people to do that circumnavigation is if no one is parking those parking spaces. If they're available to cut through there and they're used to coming to the site, which I'm guessing you have tons of return customers, they're absolutely not going to do that. You'll have a maintenance nightmare with your pavement markings, and it'll turn into an open driveway anyway. So I would recommend that you just anticipate that and design it that way.
Okay, so, sorry, we did cross signals then.
Yeah.
Okay, so your input is to add a drive aisle with those easterly 6 spaces in the northern lot to have a drive aisle and an island?
Yeah, and if there's concerns about entering and exiting traffic, I mean, you can stripe a double yellow line or some pavement markings to delineate those spaces and reiterate to drivers where they're supposed to be maneuvering within the site.
I do want to say that I appreciated in reading it the complexity of this intersection and trying to accommodate that as best possible. So kudos, because when I first looked at it, I thought cars every which way, trying to turn left into
We are
this.
still working on that, yes.
So the preferred layout then would be what's shown on page 84 with the landscape island. Part of my concern is circulation through the site, understanding, like Mr. Bartlett said, of where to go once you enter the site. So I think having that drive aisle there is great, but it also, having the landscape island there alleviates some of my concern with having such a large parking lot with no building in front of it. And that's just the visual appeal of all the asphalt. So breaking that up with the landscape island, particularly towards the front of the lot, I think is very helpful. So good on that? Do we?
Yeah, we're first of
agree
all,
on
we
that?
already have a condition subject for the layout to be approved by Mobile GR, and based on John Bartlett's testimony or statements, it's going to be required anyway.
Great.
So that preferred plan you referenced is going to have to, let me rephrase that. The plan you have on the screen before you will have to be updated with that drive aisle and landscape island in the permitting process.
Perfect. The relocation of the sidewalk, I think, I would like I think that makes sense. We don't have a landscape plan here. I understand that it's subject to the requirements of parking lot screening, but based on what we received for, I think, 1815 Alpine down the street, and what's there, I think it's lacking a bit. So I'd like to just note in the resolution or in this discussion that we should have more robust landscape screening, especially for the size of this parking lot. So hopefully, with the city's help, we can do better on this site. And that's all I have.
One quick clarification, maybe it's enough that it's approved by Mobile GR, but the layout with the landscape island shown up along Alpine shows 5 or so spaces projecting, quite close to the Alpine right-of-way that may impact the sidewalk relocation. I'm assuming that all that we don't have to worry about that. All that can get worked out with Mobile GR and LUDs and all that business, right?
Yeah, typically some of those final layout decisions do get made during the permitting review process. We try to balance, your scope of authority is really about the amount of parking, which I realize is directly tied to the layout. So I don't want to dismiss that, but some of the finer engineer details, we wait until the permitting process because we don't want the applicants to have to spend that time and money.
Yep.
So,
okay, I'm comfortable with that.
yep. So there might be a little bit of shifting, I think is my point.
To that point, if we assume that is a heavily trafficked drive lane, those spots, which people will be backing out of most likely, won't be all that safe either. Because that will be the entrance that most people, like if you're coming from Ann Street, that will be the entrance that you use, and you'll most likely turn left immediately to get as close to the building as possible. And I could see how that could be problematic. So yeah, I hadn't noticed the movement of those spaces, but hopefully city staff can figure that one out.
That's why we hire traffic engineers.
Any further discussion? Does somebody have a motion?
Sure. Yeah, everyone buckle up. Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves a special land use and site plan review request of JARS Holdings LLC, Hani Kassab Jr., to establish a recreational marijuana retailer with additional parking at 1947 and 1961 Alpine Avenue Northeast for the following reasons. The proposed use will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance, including the zone district, because the use will support the vitality of the local economy by encouraging investment, diversifying the economic base, and expanding employment opportunities, and support the 2002 Community Master Plan goal to encourage business investment while balancing economic growth with priorities for neighborhoods, the natural environment, and the quality of the built environment. Objective SE7. The proposed use will meet the site plan review standards of section 5.12.08.e because the surrounding roadways and access points are anticipated to be adequate to accommodate the trips generated by the proposed development. The parking lot expansion will provide ample and clearly marked parking for customers and employees, but will also create a safe experience for those navigating the site. And the site and building will meet the zoning ordinance requirements, such as building orientation and transparency, intended to create a safe environment through increased surveillance. The proposed use will be compatible, harmonious, and appropriate with the existing or planned character and uses of the neighborhood, adjacent properties, and the natural environment, because the proposed building and site improvements generally maintain the existing layout of the property and character of the area. And the applicant has completed a good neighbor plan with the West Grand Neighborhood Organization, including neighborhood engagement. The proposed use will minimize potential adverse effects on the neighborhood because the applicant is proposing adequate on-site parking for their needs, and landscape improvements will enhance the visual aesthetics of the site and create a natural separation between the site and the public sidewalk and street. The proposed use will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to existing or future uses or to the public welfare because excessive amounts of noise, glare, or visual clutter are not typically associated with marijuana retail sales. A good neighbor plan is required to be submitted and honored, and the applicant has provided an odor control management plan as required by marijuana facility use regulations. The proposed use will not adversely affect the walkability of the neighborhood, impair pedestrian circulation patterns, disrupt the continuity of the urban street wall, or hinder the creation of a pedestrian-oriented environment because the property is accessible from public sidewalks and the building entrance is oriented to the street, and the character of the area in the vicinity of the property is predominantly auto-oriented, and the proposed use will not significantly change that condition. Adequate public or private infrastructure and services do already exist or will be provided at no additional cost because the proposed use seeks to reuse an existing developed property, which is currently serviced by public services, and an increased police and fire presence associated with the proposed use is not generally required more than other retail commercial land uses. The proposed use will not be detrimental to the financial stability or economic welfare of the city because the proposed use is expected to generate several jobs and tax revenues. An excessive use of police resources is not anticipated to be generated by the proposed establishment relative to noise, calls for service, trespass enforcement, parking, vehicular use by patrons, or vandalism. The proposed use will comply with all other applicable city ordinances and policies and all applicable state laws. Because the marijuana industry is closely regulated by local and state agency regulations, and the proposed use will be subject to all such regulations. Be it further resolved, the following conditions of approval shall apply to this project. Standard conditions sets A, approvals, and B, marijuana operations. The standard conditions set A, approvals, is on the screen and I'll read them. That the application and plans submitted by the applicant and signed, dated, and stamped by the planning director shall constitute the approved plans except if plan elements do not meet ordinance requirements and/or amended in this resolution. That the use shall operate according to the application and per testimony as recorded in the Planning Commission minutes. That this approval does not include any proposed signs, and any future sign shall be subject to the requirements of Article 15 of the ordinance and permits received prior to installation. That a land use development services, LUDS permit, building permit, and all other required permits be obtained from the City of Grand Rapids prior to construction, demolition, or operation. That any expansion of the approved special land use requires an additional special land use review and approval by the Planning Commission. That the proposed use will comply with all other applicable city ordinances and policies and all state laws. That the approval shall take effect 16 calendar days from the date of the Planning Commission's decision. Standard condition set B, marijuana operations. That this approval is for only the requested marijuana facility type and does not include any approval for any other current or future facility type as permitted by local or state statutes or ordinances. That all commitments made by the applicant in the Good Neighbor Plan, operations and management plan, public hearing, testimony, and is this my Vita? Is that how you guys say? Is that how we say it? My Vita. And or SISEVA, if applicable, shall be honored in good faith by the applicant and or future operators of this land use. That the operation of this land use be subject to the approved SEPTED plan and any related local and state ordinances with any changes to that plan subject to the review and approval by the Grand Rapids Police Department. that all regulations of Section 5.9.19 specific to marijuana facilities be met, including product visibility restrictions and hours of operation limited per the application and testimony. That the facility plan as submitted to Laura be submitted to the planning director prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy, and that any changes to the security plan as submitted to Laura shall also be submitted to the planning director. That evidence of a valid and effective general liability insurance policy meeting the requirements of Section 5.9.19F.F.4 be submitted to the planning director for review and approval prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy. That a license from the state of Michigan shall be required prior to the operation, and that a City of Grand Rapids license shall be required for this facility. And this approval does not include approval of either license. Number 2, that all marijuana special land use approvals at 1815 Alpine Avenue Northwest are revoked upon issuance of a certificate of occupancy for the subject location at 1947 and 1961 Alpine Avenue Northwest. That evidence of application for a lot combination shall be submitted prior to issuance of a LUDS permit. That the site shall comply with applicable green site elements, including but not limited to green space, tree canopy, and parking lot screening and landscaping requirements. That site lighting shall comply with Section 5.2.19. That transparency on the south elevation shall be waived. That final site plan approval is subject to approval by Mobile GR and engineering. That cost of necessary signal modification and utility relocation shall be borne by the developer.
Support.
Wondering if you would consider expanding upon item 4, that the applicable green site elements shall be met, including parking lot, landscaping, period, and that the applicant shall work with the planning director on a landscape plan that provides parking lot screening that exceeds the requirements of the zoning ordinance.
Yes.
Approved.
Speaking to the comment that Commissioner Van Streen had about having maybe a more robust landscape plan on the frontage, given the amount of parking that's being proposed. And then a new condition of approval that states that the Alpine Avenue sidewalk shall be relocated to be as close to compliant with city standards as practically feasible, and that a sidewalk easement be provided.
And is that in addition to, is that kind of an expansion of number 7?
It could be, yes.
Okay. All right.
It's fine.
Yep, that's great. Thanks.
Support.
We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes.
The next item on our agenda is for 655 Ann Street Northwest. This is a cannabis-related request, but the request before you today is not for the cannabis uses, but for expansion of parking to exceed the minimum parking required by more than 20%. The property is located in the Industrial Zone District, the SDIT Zone District. It is west of US 131, east of Alpine, on the north side of Ann Street. The property is approximately just under 2 acres, and it is completely paved aside from a small rectangle of grass and a mature tree on the site. It is bounded on all sides by industrial uses. To the north and to the west is property owned that is being developed for Profile Films. It might look familiar because it came before you a few meetings ago. To the east is, and to the south are railroad right-of-way, and this use right next door in the corner to the southeast is in an industrial use, I believe it's Zimmer Drywall. Some background on this property. It did receive, originally, it received medical cannabis approval in 2019 by special land use. In 2020, the special land use was amended by administrative director review to include recreational cannabis uses. Then the property, which had been part of 701 Ann, in 2022, the property was split into two separate properties, resulting in 701 Ann that is being developed for Profile Films, and the subject property before you today, 655 Ann. As a result of that property split, there was another director review approving the cannabis uses to be contained just on the property 655 Ann. And that approval included construction of a new 14,000 square foot building with about 10,000 square feet devoted to processing and 3,500 square feet devoted to accessory co-located retailer. This approval also included a maximum of 15 parking spaces for the uses. A LUDS permit was issued in May of this year, and the approved site plan on the LUDS permit the building is a little bit smaller. It's just over 10,000 square feet, and this is the approved site plan on the LUDS permit, and it does include the 15 parking spaces consistent with the director review approval. So the applicant is requesting 42 parking spaces, which is more than 20% over the maximum allowed for the uses on the property. And that requires special land use, which is why it's before you today. Based on the submitted floor plan, you can see the large portion of the building is devoted to processing, and the retail will be located towards Ann Street on the south side of the building. Based on the submitted floor plan, a total of 11 parking spaces is required for the two uses, with a maximum of 14 parking spaces. The applicant has provided a parking demand study as required by the zoning ordinance for this request. And the study applied a 1-to-1 ratio for the processing use, 15 employees, resulting in a need for 15 parking spaces. For the retail use, the study provided a range based on similar retail uses across the state, and they applied the average of this range to the analysis of the need for this property of 7.2 spaces per 1,000 square feet for the retail portion, resulting in 17 parking spaces. The applicant anticipates a peak demand of 20 to 25 customers at any given time. And the study concluded that both uses would need a range from 24 to 62 parking spaces with an average demand of 32 parking spaces. So the request for 42 parking spaces would meet this demand. The applicant has reached out to the West Grand Neighborhood Association, and yesterday we received an email from West Grand expressing support for this request. I will also mention that on Ann Street, there is no bus service on Ann Street. The bus route runs along Alpine, and the closest transit stop is approximately 1,000 feet from the subject property. There is no parking in the vicinity, and Ann Street has bike lanes on both sides of the street. So in sum, we are asking the Planning Commission to consider the request for 42 parking spaces, which is over the maximum allowed for the uses on this property in the industrial zone district. Are there any questions for me at this time?
Laura, there's a existing curb cut on the south edge of the site, and it's not clear from the site plan what's happening with that. Do you know?
I didn't do a deep analysis because the submitted plan, this was the plan that was approved on the LUDS permit, and very little of the plan is changing from what was approved to what is proposed, aside from the additional parking spaces to the east and to the north. The curb cut that was approved to the south for that entrance, that's on the approved plan, that's not proposed to change. So I think it's, utilizing that area, but it would need to meet city standards. So I believe that's the only curb cut on the property. But it will need to be replaced to meet standards.
Okay. It seems relevant to me because if they're requesting additional parking spaces, that means there's going to be an increased use of the driveway. And if there's another driveway right next to it, hence the concern.
Is that not on the other property?
John, do you want to come up and talk to this, please?
I should have sat closer. Yeah, so the changes to the driveway, it currently occupies the same street frontage as that driveway to the south that you mentioned. It's one super wide driveway for whatever reason the use was before that required that. So we've required this development to improve the frontage to separate those two driveways and build them at city standards, which is a narrower driveway, and the sidewalk to be level between the two of them and not just stay at that angled slope across the whole frontage. In terms of the question about the driveway's proximity to each other, the driveway further south is a pretty low usage throughout the day, and so from a traffic perspective, we don't have a concern that they're located that closely together. Yep.
Any other questions for Laura? Okay, then we'll invite the applicant up.
Hi. Tyler Cravens, again, Mitten State Engineering. I think she summed it up really well. Just like JARS, ultimately, the 14 spaces that are allowed won't allow us to operate efficiently. And so we're requesting the additional parking spaces for customers and employees. We do, like she mentioned, intend on having 15 employees on the maximum shift. So we'll have to have a minimum of 15 spaces for the employees alone. And we believe that 42 spaces will allow us to operate efficiently.
How many customers at any one time can
Yeah, so
facility and the waiting room, that whole thing we were just talking about?
we
in the
anticipate
practice?
between 20 and 25 customers in the facility at any given time.
So does that mean there's 20, from the way I understood, it's a one-on-one kind of transaction and that there would be an employee for every customer?
Correct.
So there's 15 employees for the processing. Are you talking about 20 employees then for the?
Yeah, so I think it's a total, and Matt Roman is here as well. I believe it's a total of 15 employees on any given shift between the processing and the provisioning center. Not 15 for the processing and an additional.
So what is that breakdown? Do you know?
5 and 10 on the low and 15.
Sorry, for the record, do you mind
Matthew Roman, I'm one of your house counsel.
come up to the mic? Thank you.
Matthew Roman, one of the in-house counsels for Cloud Cannabis. Yeah, so on a light shift, we're running like 10, on a heavy shift, 15 in the retail portion. So.
And in the processing, just 5?
Just 5 back there, yep.
Don't distract me. Okay, so and is there a waiting area? Oh, I see there is a waiting area there
There is.
for that. So when I first read the application, it sounded more like it was a processing center, but it sounds like the retail operation is of the same size, if not even larger, in
Well,
terms
square
of
footage.
number of people in and out.
Number of people, yes, because processing a lot of machines, stuff like that, but actually square footage, processing is 3 times the size.
Okay.
More intense use. Yep.
I'm sorry, can I ask a question about processing? It's not like a distribution center. What is processing? What are you doing when you're processing?
There's 3 license types: growing, processing, and retail. Processing is where you take like the flour, stuff like that, turn into other things, vape carts, gummies, actually kind of turn the chemical structure of the plant. And/or it could also be things like doing pre-rolled, infused pre-rolled, stuff like that.
Got you. I'm learning a lot.
Yeah.
So these aren't taste testers. These are people who are working.
Oh, yes.
Correct.
Got you.
Yes.
So 5 at one time
Yes.
in the processing center, and then the rest up on the actual sales floor.
Correct.
Okay.
And will that processing center, the product coming out of that, serve just this retail or other retail
It'll,
operations?
other retail as well. So we have 17 stores live right now. By the end of the year, we have about another 4 or 5 coming online.
Okay, and how many stores does a processing center like this serve usually?
Well, we have another processing center as well in Mount Pleasant. This will a few stores at least.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay.
Any other questions for the applicant at this time? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll open up the public hearing for anyone who would like to comment on this case. Make your way up to the microphone.
Don't get us started.
When we established our ordinance a while ago, the Planning Commission did a field trip and got to visit examples of all these different types of places, but there's probably not so many of us left who made those visits.
Yeah, I think us new people need orientation.
Maybe, yeah. Okay, we'll close the public hearing and turn to discussion.
It's curious to me. I understand what they're talking. It's a little like the dog wagging, or I can't remember that phrase, but I thought what we were mainly approving is a processing center, but it sounds like this is kind of equal in terms of both being a retail and a processing
Yeah.
center.
You're actually approving a parking for the use.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So the
Sorry.
use itself, the primary use of the property is supposed to be the processor. It's an industrial zone district, and that was determined to be the industrial use. The ordinance does allow for co-located facilities, and in this case, it would be a co-located retailer. I know we've been working with the applicant to get a little bit more detail, both from the building permits perspective as well as the planning review, because the lack of detail on the processor is insufficient for us to really understand how the operation will be functioning. And again, making sure that this is a primary use of the property. I think where we've been challenged with this particular request is that this being an industrial district is intended to serve job centers, industrial users that have significant demand or needs for transportation of goods and services. And so having the Planning Commission review the amount of parking that per testimony is being generated by the intensity of the retail use, I think is something that the Planning Commission needs to consider. As to what truly is the primary use of the property here. And it shouldn't be the retailer because of the district that this is in.
I would just say at the, I hear all of those comments, and it kind of makes me want to move to Hawaii and just sell T-shirts, because then I don't have to make decisions. Because yes, this is an industrial center. We want it to be an industrial center. It's, but I'm just trying to think for the, at least for the nature of this business, you know, if they decided, hey, let's move to somebody's neighborhood and set up shop, right? This room will be full of people opposed to it. So yeah, I don't know. I overall, just like in the last case, I probably would be in favor of it. Again, we're getting rid of green to sell green and make green. But yeah, I think I would be in favor of it.
So I understand the concerns about the intent for industrial zone districts, but if I'm understanding it correctly, we're talking about parking only. So that means that the use is already allowed as it's currently shown. And so I know the number of spaces potentially speaks to one use being more prominent than the other. I guess my thought with all of that is that potentially we need to look at the zoning ordinance and reconsider how it's written so that we are resolving these potential issues in the future. But for right now, we're just talking about parking spaces. And I think similar to the previous, like I think that there's a case for the spaces. So I think in this case, I'm in support. I'm also in support of revisiting our industrial zone districts and working out whether or not this kind of situation is appropriate in the future.
This is a side note. It's interesting that in our new master plan that we just approved and sent up to the City Commission, we talk a lot about, not a lot, but they brought forward, which I thought was exciting, this idea of, and I can't remember, artist type of industrial retail combined. And I happened to be on Cherry Street, and I walked into the leather goods and then realized that they make the leather goods there. And I thought, this is a great example. And so I agree that maybe and that was in a retail district, and this is in an industrial district. So it seems that those either need to be delineated or further understanding of what's first and what's second and how those commingle together. So I agree that we, in the future, look at that. Is this going to be a trend? Which it is right now, it seems, in some of our retail areas, and I think it's a great trend to be able to walk in a store and see somebody making something and maybe buying it too, and that interaction. As we look at usage of our industrial space, is that a trend also? I don't know, but otherwise, I appreciate it's just a parking discussion right now.
Yeah, I think this is to the previous comments about taking out green. I guess in this case, the site is currently 100% asphalt, and so we are adding back some non-pervious surface, some green space at least, which I'm grateful for. I think if we're not, going to reconsider the proposed retail use in the industrial area, then I'm comfortable with the parking as proposed. I don't want to see it be a burden on neighbors, if there's not adequate parking there. So I think I'm okay with it as is.
Yeah, I'm not going to add any more to this conversation because we are looking at parking. And although I don't really understand the process, I feel like that is a whole different conversation. And I can't, without knowing that, I can't say to myself, well, it seems like there's more retail going on here. It seems like there is, I just can't make that judgment call based on this information. So the information that's presented here, the information and the discussions we had in the previous case, I feel like this is something that that I'll get comfortable with.
Any further discussion? I think for me, the zone district matters. I'm trying to get through my head what does that mean in this case? And I think I go back to the adverse effect question, and I think the main concern would be if this use is maybe less intense than the traditional industrial use, or certainly different. Will that have a negative impact on the rest of the industrial zone district? And actually, I think making sure that they have enough parking to not overflow into the neighbors is probably the best answer to that. But is anybody else thinking of any other adverse effects to the other industrial uses?
I mean, other than having retail customers that are coming and going at a relatively regular and short cycle clip, which I think can be challenging in industrial areas where you have truck traffic and other things. But again, I don't think that's what we're here to talk about. So I don't know that can play into the decision.
This also isn't on like a industrial cul-de-sac or something. We've considered more retail or entertainment type uses in industrial areas where it's not a throughway or a busy corridor as it is. So I think this is completely different. And yeah, we've had a few over the years. So I'm not concerned about allowing for the parking here to accommodate a retail use.
Anybody have a motion?
I can do it, and then I'm done. Yeah. Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves a special land use and site plan review request of FHB2 LLC, Jessica Heffernan, to increase the number of parking spaces in excess of the maximum permitted to support an approved marijuana processor and accessory retailer at 655 Ann Street Northwest for the following reasons. The proposed use will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance, including the zone district, because the proposed use will support the 2002 community master plan goal to encourage business investment while balancing economic growth with priorities for neighborhoods, the natural environment, and the quality of the built environment. Objective SE7. The proposed use will meet the site plan review standards of section 5.12.08.e because the site will be developed so as not to impede the normal and orderly development or improvement of the surrounding property for permitted uses, and safe, convenient, and well-defined vehicular, bicycle, and pedestrian circulation within and to and from the site will be provided. The proposed use will be compatible, harmonious, and appropriate with character and the uses of the neighborhood, adjacent properties, and the natural environment because adequate parking will be provided on site to meet the anticipated parking demand, and the established industrial area does not have street parking or nearby bus routes necessitating additional on-site parking. Potential adverse effects arising from the proposed use will be minimized because the parking provided is appropriate for the need demonstrated by the demand study. An adequate parking lot screening and landscaping will be provided. The proposed use will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to existing or future uses or to the public welfare because expansion of the surface parking law and provision of adequate parking is intended to lessen the impact of additional traffic in the area. The proposed use will not adversely affect the walkability of the neighborhood, impair pedestrian circulation patterns, disrupt the continuity of the urban street wall, or otherwise hinder the creation of a pedestrian-oriented environment, because appropriate site improvements will be provided to facilitate safe and efficient pedestrian circulation, and the surface parking lot will be appropriately landscaped to enhance neighborhood walkability. The proposed use will not be detrimental to the financial stability or economic welfare of the city because the use will encourage other investments in the area. The proposed use will comply with all other applicable city ordinances and policies and all applicable state laws. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to this project. Standard condition set A on your screen.
Second.
We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. The motion carries.
Hi there. The next item on the agenda is a request for 1314 South Division Avenue. The request is to establish a sewing company with a retail storefront in an existing 25,000 square foot commercial industrial building. It's located in the TNTBA zone district. The use under consideration is a commercial sewing company, and I'll tell you a little more, and as will the applicant. But I might actually refer to something that Commissioner Shannon said in the last in the last discussion. Commissioner Shannon was talking about that leather goods store where they sell the goods that they make there, okay? So we would consider that a artisanal or creative industry, okay? So that could fall under that umbrella. In this case, we, upon discussion of the use with the applicant, we determined that this could fall into that same category because of the size of the operation, 25,000 square feet, not a huge industrial use, but something larger than 5,000 square feet, which requires special land use from the Planning Commission. And so because of that determination that we felt this could fall under that, this is before you today. The site is on the South Division corridor. It's zoned TNTBA. To the east, we have traditional neighborhood mixed density residential zoning, and we have medium density residential uses to the east and a range of uses along South Division there. This particular building, I knew it as the St. Vincent de Paul resale shop, and then it was owned by Mel Trotter. And it was, over time, it's been used for mostly industrial uses, and that was how it was constructed. about half the site is improved with this 2.5-story building, 2-story building of about 25,000 square feet. It also has an adjacent parking lot. The applicant is proposing to use the building for their commercial sewing company. According to their application, they sew designs and create seating for a wide range of customers, and I'm sure the applicant will be able to explain this a little bit better than I can, but here is an example, or some examples of what they create. Back to the floor plan, on the ground floor, they propose an area of about 5,000 square feet at the front of the building for retail. And that, I think, is a part of their business that they want to expand upon as they move into this building. They'll have an area for embroidery machine operations, fabric cutting tables, loading dock storage, sewing operations, conference room, and office. The business has about 18 employees and anticipates growing to 25 employees. Hours of operation start at 6 a.m. and end at about 2:30 p.m. for production, and 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. for the retail use. Deliveries and pickups will occur between 8 and 4:30 p.m. Now, the applicant anticipates deliveries to occur from the Home Street parking lot. There's some on-street parking on LaBelle, and the applicant anticipates that retail customers would come to the building and park on the street on LaBelle and enter the building on that LaBelle side. That's what you see in this bottom photo here. There's an entrance on LaBelle. There's a loading dock on South Division, but they do not anticipate using that. They'll be using the loading dock on the north side of the building. Relative to site improvements, or the site, right now, the parking lot is surrounded by I believe it's a 6-foot-high chain link fence with barbed wire atop. And we were very happy to find out that the applicant intends to remove that and replace it with a 4-foot-high decorative aluminum fence, just as we were suggesting. So we were all happy about that. Now, one of the things that you probably would have noticed as the parking lot is non-conforming relative to parking lot screening and interior landscaping. Now, with 16 parking spaces, I think this is where we need to do a little balancing act between providing on-site parking and providing that parking lot screening and green space. So I think that's something I'd ask the Planning Commission to discuss today, is the extent to which you would like the site brought closer to conformity with parking lot screening requirements. So the applicant will be installing decorative fencing, 4-foot-high fencing around the perimeter of the parking lot. But if we do ask for additional landscaping, then that will impact the number of parking spaces that will be provided. And the reason that that is important is because the site will be slightly short in parking for the combination of uses, the production, the retail, and then the associated office. 22 parking spaces will be required. There are about 16 parking spaces on site. Some of them are, I'd say, don't meet our current site layout requirements, but they're already there. So the site is a little bit short. As I mentioned before, there is on-street parking on LaBelle. So people that might be coming and going quickly from the site would likely use the LaBelle Street entrance. The applicant has done some neighborhood outreach, and I'll actually defer to the applicant to talk about that. So in sum, we're looking at what we're calling an artisanal and creative industry due to the relative lack of industrial impacts, such as noise, smoke, odor, or vibration. And it's over 5,000 square feet, so it requires special land use. We're asking the Planning Commission whether this use, the particular use and the size and scale of use is appropriate here on this site, as well as a parking reduction and any kind of improvements to bring the site closer to green site element requirements. Do you have any questions for me?
There would be on-street parking available on Home Street as well, correct?
Yes, I didn't really include that because of the curb cuts there, but yes, there is some there as well. On the LaBelle side, there's no curb cut. Well, there's one, but there's a number of parking spaces immediately adjacent. So that's why I mentioned that, but indeed, there is some on Home as well.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Any other questions? Okay, I'll invite Mr. Volkema up.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim Volkema, and I am the owner and president of AC Sewing. We are a contract sewing company founded in 1992 in Grand Rapids. AC stands for American Contract Sewing Company. Over time, that got shortened to AC Sewing. We currently have various partnerships locally with a wide variety of businesses where we do the behind-the-scenes work for them. We make upholstery, we do upholstery, we hit a home run with Cinemark movie theaters developing slip covers for their movie theaters. During COVID, they were spraying the seats down with chemicals, and over time the fabric just fell apart. And so Irwin came to me and said, hey, we're having a hard time developing this in-house. If AC Sewing can develop this could be a significant win for you guys. And so we developed a cover that slides right over an existing recliner, and Cinemark went ahead and purchased, I think, 30,000 of them. So that's an example of what we do. We do a lot of problem solving. I would like to get away from that a little bit because it is hard to run a business when you're solving everyone else's problems. And it requires a lot of, I guess, sweat equity on my part. We do a lot of different home goods, and like, for example, totes. That pillow you see there is the Gun Lake Casino, so we did the pillows there. When I say it's hard to do, I'd like to pivot to retail because, for example, like those tote bags you see in the middle, we make and sell them to a customer for, I think, $17, and they turn around and sell them for, I think, $300 on Saks Fifth Avenue. So, so we'd like to see some of that money stay here. Yes, I'd like to. The future of AC Sewing is retail, probably not in the traditional storefront walking up to a brick and mortar, but we do see that e-commerce is our future. we make so many cool things, and it's too bad that we're sometimes in the background, and I'd like to bring AC Sewing to the foreground. We're currently in a building that is, it's just not a good building. We're on Godfrey Ave. The building is probably 40 years past its prime, and I'd like to provide something better for our workers. We have a primarily Latin, Hispanic-based workforce. We've just found that some of the most talented sewists are coming from Latin America. And I also speak Spanish, so it's been a cool dynamic to see the sewist being connected directly to the front office. And it's really changed the dynamic of our company. We do a lot of different industries. We do have military-related products. We have a lot of home goods, and like this past year, we developed a hunting saddle. So that's a thing that is very popular right now. We do some upcycling. We take billboards. Actually, if you see the one in the middle, I think that is GR Experience, and they, through our customer, have us make those out of billboards. I think that's all. Yeah, we're looking to pivot and get into our own space. For retail, I'm developing right now a couple products, a product line called Throw and Go Covers, which should be a pretty significant product that we'll be bringing to market, and that is currently set for 2025 release. Some other things, we do a lot of products for companies where their owners are aging, and there is some interest for them to sell those to us. So eventually I could foresee AC Sewing having 4 or 5 major retail direct-to-customer products where we're making in the upstairs and selling in the downstairs. So, thanks.
All right, thank you. Any questions for the applicant at this time?
Can you talk a little bit about the reduction in parking? This is an interesting diversion from our other topics today, but how that's going to fit your needs for your workforce and just how all that works.
So as it was stated, we are 18 workers right now. That number fluctuates a little bit, but 4 of them, so 8 people, 4 couples, they are either married or they live together or they're brothers or sisters. So we do have, so our parking needs aren't as much as, I guess, what would dictate the ordinances. And then I think because of the location, part of the desire for this building is it is in a prime area, centrally located for our workers who primarily live in that Eastern Ave to Clyde Park, like Franklin to 28th Street, a very strong presence there. Mm-hmm. And there are even a couple workers that could walk to work now. I'm all for biking. I'm all for public transit. And for example, I know one of the issues was right of way. There's a couple planters that were planter boxes that have since fallen apart. I could see us removing those and maybe potentially getting permits to put some bike racks there. So part of our business, the reason why workers really like our model is because we're centrally located to their housing. They can bring their kids to school, they can punch out, and there's some flexibility there that if they lived 20, 30 minutes away, they couldn't do. So it's very common for a worker to take 20 minutes off, go bring their kids to school, and come back to work. So I really, I'm hoping that this location does work out for us because it would be a benefit to our workers. I did some community engagement. We did have a meeting. What was interesting is I took an afternoon and just walked the whole neighborhood, minimum 300 feet, a perimeter. And I got to meet some of the business owners. And for example, to the north of us is La Bendición, which is a convenience store. To the south of us is a taqueria. There's a taller, a mechanic to our west. And I could foresee, for example, our workers bringing business to these people. So it's already a very dominant Hispanic area. I didn't realize that. I guess I've been here in Grand Rapids for most of my life, and I didn't realize that corridor there on Division, a lot of Hispanic businesses have moved in. So there was some excitement with a couple of the people I engaged with in the neighborhood. The store clerk at La Bendición, he said, wow, that'd be great for us to have that traffic come through. So very little engagement with private residences. I talked to a couple people, and they just were more curious than anything. And I explained to them, and so we did have a community meeting, and I think there's like 5 people that showed up, but mostly people that were invested in this process already. For example, the Garfield Park Neighborhood Associate, Kate came to our meeting, and a few other people did too. So I think people just want to see something good happening there. We aren't your traditional industrial commercial business where we are making noise and bringing a lot of dirty things to the neighborhood. It's actually interesting because a lot of our customers, they do things like tote bags, and so now they're coming to this neighborhood. I think it'd be a very positive, it would bring a lot of positive foot traffic to the neighborhood.
Great, thanks. Will you have a dumpster?
We will have a dumpster, and we actually figured out that on the LaBelle, so on the bottom picture, on the right side is a bay, and that actually would be a perfect area to house the bins on the inside. And then once a week we would open that up, and if wherever the waste service needs it, we would move it.
Would you be willing to do some landscaping along, I think it would be along Division, or the perimeter of the parking lot? I know that could impact the number of parking spaces you have, but.
So we would be open to a lot of different options. The parking, I would say, obviously I'm going to comply with whatever the commission needs. But our needs, I would be afraid to reduce our parking lot too much. Because we do want to grow. We do want to bring jobs to the city. So, but with that said, right now I lease, and it is really hard to want to put into a building money when the building owner could care less. So that dynamic changes when I own the building, and I don't want an eyesore. I don't want to be an owner of an eyesore. The razor wire, it's got to go, right?
Yeah, thank you.
It's not a prison, and there's a lot of things like on Division Ave. There's a beautiful entrance, and it's probably been boarded for decades, I'm guessing. I think to restore that to its original beauty would be high on my priority list. Of course, I'm going to look for all sorts of grants and possibilities in that way, but I see the potential in this building, and it just needs some investment. And if we're planted in there, and we stake our claim there, that we will do everything we can to beautify the area. We want to be proud of it, so.
All right, great, thank you. We'll open up the public hearing for anyone who would like to speak on this case. Make your way up to the microphone. Go right ahead. If you're willing, state your name for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes to share your comments.
Good afternoon. My name is Edgar Hernandez. Yes, I would like to comment about the parking around this building. I am the owner of one property, I think five house from this building. We have a small issue with the parking, almost in the corner with this building, all about La Belle. I saw the apartments in the close to this building. Always they have problem with the parking because they doesn't have enough room in the street. Usually they park in the street too. One of my tenants, they park on the street too because the driveway only can fit, my driveway only can fit 2 cars. So I think business one like this, maybe we can figure out how works the parking for the neighbor, because when customer from that building, from what I see on my experience, they park always in the street. Okay, when they park on the street, they make traffic sometime because all the street by division always is, we have many traffic there. So when the customer from that building right now, some of them, they need, if they come from Burton Street or 28, they try to park almost in the corner. Okay, and people who come from Jefferson Street, that make traffic sometimes, especially with this weather that is on the way. So I think it's a small issue with the parking for the neighbor, but I don't know how we can work with this little issue. It's for all the neighbors who live there, because when the weather is coming, when it's snowing, I saw some tenants from this building, they park sometime 50 feet away from their entrance. So it's a little problem about this. My opinion, what I see there. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we'll close the public hearing and invite Jim back up if you would anything you'd like to add at this time.
Thank you for coming. AC Sewing is, I think it's going to be a departure from like a Mel Trotter thrift store. The times I went to Mel Trotter thrift store, there were at times 8, 9 people in there shopping. So I can see how if you have 8 or 9 cars, that it would spill down the road. Our storefront will primarily be more of a showcase, I think, than actually people walking in to purchase. And again, we are really focused on e-commerce. And so I would foresee that at the very least, what we could do is clearly mark areas that are for AC Sewing and just be sensitive to the neighborhood. And then also just understanding that it's not going to be a heavy foot traffic thrift store. So Thanks for your time, and is there anything else? Okay.
Nope, thank you. All right, commissioners, discussion.
Well, I have to say that it sounds like you already have a car sharing program that's helpful and something that some other companies probably would envy because it takes a lot of work to get there. The idea that we're reutilizing a building that's been an eyesore and begs to be redeveloped into something that both is an employment-based industrial use, but the potential for some retail, and in a kind of artisan type that we talked about earlier, where you don't have the smoke and the noise and those kinds of things, I think brings an advantage to the neighborhood. So the parking issue I'm not as concerned about. I'm sure we have good transit on Division in this area with the Division Avenue thing, and agree that the retail part of it is when it's kind of an order thing, almost like you might call and make a reservation, or you know, it's different than just coming in and browsing, and you've got some ideas in mind. So I think that the parking and the availability of bike racks and transit, and we're always looking for this in our neighborhoods, I think that the applicant has presented a good plan for that.
Yeah, I think with this being a business-to-business versus business-to-retail operation, that really mitigates the need for the parking situation. I am glad to hear that the fencing is going to get improved, because what's there right now is truly an eyesore. But to keep businesses in the city and to help the South Division corridor improve is much needed. I think it's a good project.
Yeah, I agree. I think I love the idea of the business going in here and the opportunity it presents for the neighborhood and for jobs and for continued growth. I love the vision of the business and where it's headed. I love to see it here. It's an area I frequent. So yeah, I think it's great. I'm not concerned about the parking.
It's I think, a happy problem that there's high demand for wanting to be in this area from both businesses and residents. So, but yeah, we'll have to work together on the parking issues. Anyone else? Or does somebody have a motion?
I'll make a motion. Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves the special land use and site plan review request of AC Sewing, Inc. to establish a sewing company with a retail storefront and an existing 25,000 square foot commercial industrial building in the TBA zone district for the following reasons. The proposed use will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance, including the zone district, because the proposed use will support the South Division area specific plan recommendation for adaptive reuse of existing building stock for a mix of uses. Support the Community Master Plan, Chapter 5, A Strong Economy, recommendation of utilizing an existing vacant building, which will encourage additional investment and activity and better enhance the potential for future retail use. The proposed use will meet the site plan review standards of Section 5.12.08.e because the proposed sewing company will utilize an existing building that was designed to reflect TBA site and building element requirements. The site will have adequate ingress and egress to the parking lot, building, public streets, and sidewalks. Safe, convenient, and well-defined vehicular, bicycle, and pedestrian circulation within and to and from the site is provided. The proposed use will be compatible, harmonious, and appropriate with the character and uses of the neighborhood, adjacent properties, and the natural environment because the proposed use will support the desired mixed character of the neighborhood by offering a business that will complement other nearby businesses. The applicant will make modifications to the exterior of the building to make the building safer and more visually appealing, which will increase the vitality of the South Division Avenue. Potentially adverse effects arising from the proposed development on the neighborhood and adjacent properties will be minimized through improved parking lot screening, sufficient off-street parking, and loading areas. The proposed uses will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to the existing or future uses or to the public welfare because production and retail hours take place at a reasonable time from 6 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. and delivery and pickups taking place from 8 a.m. to 4:30 a.m. The business is not anticipated to create noise or odor that will be disturbing to nearby residents. The proposed use will not adversely affect the walkability of the neighborhood, impair pedestrian circulation patterns, disrupt the continuity of the urban street wall, or otherwise hinder the creation of a pedestrian-oriented environment because the sewing company plans to employ nearby residents, which helps to boost the local economy and reduce traffic concerns as employees will be encouraged to walk, bike, or ride the bus to work. Site improvements will reinforce the urban street wall. The existing building is appropriately positioned on the site and is consistent with the requirements of the TBA zone district. The proposed use will not be detrimental to the financial stability and/or economic welfare of the city because the use is not anticipated to create nuances that will require additional city services. Occupying a vacant storefront for the use will enhance the financial stability of the neighborhood. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to this project. Standard A, condition A, set A approvals, which are on the screen. Number 2, that the parking lot be enclosed with a 4-foot-high decorative aluminum fence in place of the existing chain link fence.
Support.
A motion and support. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Any further Planning Commission discussion? Yep, and it's, as is our custom, we have an open public comment period, so I'll open that now for anyone who would like to address the commission. Make your way up to the microphone. State your name for the record. Seeing none, unless Mr. Bartlett's coming back up. We'll close the public comment period, and we are adjourned. Thank you.